Creating a boundary between your lawn and garden beds can really improve the look of your garden. Making a garden border is easy, and there's a range of different kinds available, from wooden to precast concrete. I'm going to show you how to use a couple of them. Firstly, we're going to use some macrocarpus sleepers to create a border, and then we'll use some concrete edging to create a tidy garden edge, which also doubles as a handy mowing strip. These macrocarpus sleepers are easy to work with and are solid enough to create a sturdy border around your garden. We're going to follow the existing garden's shape, so the sleepers will have some simple lap joins and two 45-degree lap joins. Once I've laid out the shape, we'll knock 3 reinforcing rods into each sleeper and concrete them into the ground. Okay, the first thing we need to do is run a string line out. That way we're going to ensure that our Mackie sleepers are going to be nice and straight. Okay, now to help us out, I've just cut a little bit of off-cut of Rio, pulled off a job. If you don't have one of these, you could set yourself up a profile or even just a nice little strong stick in the ground. That's all you need. So I'm going to come parallel off the fence, 1.4 metres, and that's going to be to the front of my sleepers. So let's just knock that in a little way. Now we're just going to go to the other end of the garden, measure parallel off the fence 1.4 and run a string line. Okay, so I've run my string line out and I'm just going to come 1.4. Cool. And we're just going to use our little reinforcing rod here. Now, because my backyard is sloping downhill slightly, what I'm going to do is just ensure that my sleepers are actually parallel with the ground. So I'm going to measure up on either end of this reinforcing rod about 110 mil, because our sleepers are around about 100 to 110 mil. So that way I'm going to ensure that the top part of my string line is going to be the top of our sleepers. So let's just make sure that we get our string line nice and tight. We don't want any sags in it. Okay, so we're just going to come back down to our first position and ensure that we are approximately 110 off the ground. Now just come back to your second mark and just give that a wee adjustment. We want to make sure we're 110 on our lawn, so I'll just come back and give that a wee little measure again. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. Next thing we're going to do is start prepping our Mackie sleepers. Now, there's a couple of different ways we can go about joining our Mackie sleepers together. One is by cutting a 90-degree cut on the end of this and butting the sleepers together, nice and easy. But what we're going to do is create a lap join. Now, to do this, we're going to need to cut out a rebate like this. So we're going to start marking out our Mackie sleeper. So let's just get a dimension, because some of these Mackie sleepers are slightly thicker, you know, it is rough sawn timber. That's 100 mil. Now, I've already squared the end up 90 degrees. Now, to mark out our lap join, I'm going to come back 200 millimetres. Let's just square that across. Now, the thickness of my sleeper is 100 mils, so I'm just setting my square to 50 millimetres and come down, and let's just run a line 50 millimetres all the way around. So this piece we've marked out on the top is all the timber that we're going to take out that's going to create our lap join. So let's just mark a few X's on there to indicate that's the piece that we're actually taking out. So the next thing is take our trusty circular saw. Let's just set our blade to our mark and lock that off. So we're just going to use the circular saw to run a whole lot of fins in here, then we're going to chop them out nice and easy. We've cut out all our fins. Next thing we need to do is use our chisel and follow our line that we marked around in the first place. Now, when you're using your chisel, you always want to make sure that the flat part of your chisel is on your line and the bevel part is sticking up. We only need to go on a couple of millimetres. All that's going to do is make sure that when we break these fins off, we've already set exact line where we want them to go. And same on the back. So next thing we're going to do is just break out all these fins. To do that, Just go nice and gently. And then anything that might be left over, let's just clear it up using your chisel. Okay, so when you're using your chisel to huck out any little bits that are left on there, just ensure that you've got the bevel part of your chisel facing down. That way, your chisel's not going to dig deep into your timber. It's always just going to keep flicking up. Now, because the edge of the garden is curved, we need to prep these sleepers slightly differently. The sleepers will be lap joined together, but on a 45-degree angle. Okay, what we need to do now is mark out for our 45-degree rebate. So I'm just going to set my combination square to 200 millimeters and mark that out from our 45-degree cut. Let's just put a pencil mark there. Going back to our combination square, let's just move that all the way down the end, and we're going to use the 45-degree part of that and just mark our 45-degree line. Now, what we have to do is just rebate this piece out, so we're going to set our square to 50 millimeters again. Square that all the way around, and then we're just going to rebate that out exactly like we did on the square end. We're going to mark out our holes and pre-drill them now to take our coach screws. Now these coach screws are going to link our two sleepers together. So first thing we need to do, we've got a washer underneath our coach screw. Now I've got a 28mm spade bit here. Now I've just double checked that our spade bit is slightly bigger than our washer. Okay, so we're going to use our spade bit first to pre-drill our hole. So I'm going to mark it out. Our lap joint is 200mm long, so I'm going to come back 100, that's going to be right in the center of it, and we're going to come 50mm from each edge. I've just drilled down about 12 millimeters, and I kind of guessed that, but you know what? You could do the old trick of putting some tape around your spade bit if you like, so you know exactly how far to go down, but I know I only want to go about 12 millimeters. Okay, our coach screw's got a 10mm diameter, so I'm going to pre-drill a 10mm hole all the way through our rebated spade hole. Okay, so let's just lay our first two pieces down, and let's just keep that in line with our string line. We do have a bit more time later on to get that absolutely mint. So at this stage, we want to just dry fit everything. So I'm just going to pre-drill a hole into our bottom piece. Now, the hole that we've drilled through the top was a 10mm, because we've got a 10mm coach screw. Now, the hole that we want to drill through the bottom is 7mm, so that way our coach screw's got plenty of bite going into there. So at this stage, we just want to dry fit everything. Okay, that's pretty good. Now I'm going to come back over to our 45-degree corner. Okay, so that's not looking too bad. Just going to use the clamp to hold these two together. Okay, now the reason for our dry fit, I want to pre-cut and pre-drill everything, make sure everything's looking fantastic, ready for our next step. Okay, now we've got our other corner we have to deal with here. The reason I ran my string line all the way out past our corner here is because I'm going to use that to get a parallel for our other piece that's going across the front here. So just to help us out, what I've got is just a long length of timber, and I'm just going to lay that down, and I'm going to use this to get parallel off our string line. So I'm going to be 900 millimeters away from our string line. Okay, so let's just measure 900mm off our string line. That's pretty good there. And we'll come down the other end and make sure that we're parallel. Great. So what we're going to do now is use our board just to mark on our sleeper here. I've left that long, so let's just mark that there. Now I know that's going to be 45 degrees, so I can just rebait that out exactly the same as the other end, and I'm going to just pre-cut and do all the others ready for our next step. I've completed the dry fit for all my sleepers and everything's fitting nicely. I'm going to mark out the edges of the sleepers with a spade so I know where to dig my trench later on, and then remove the coach screws at the corners. Now is a good time to number your sleepers so you know what goes where. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is secure our sleepers to the ground. Now, the reason I want to do this, I want to make sure that this edge is really nice, rock solid. So to do this, I'm going to drill some holes in the underside of our sleeper. I'm going to whack in a Rio rod, come back over here, dig some holes in the earth, and then pour some concrete in there and drop in our sleeper. Also, what I'm going to do is scrape out about 50 millimeters underside of these to allow for about 50 mil of scoria. So simply, my sleeper is going to sit on top of the scoria with the Rio bars concreted into the ground to make it sturdy. Okay, so what we need to do is mark out where our hole's going to go. I'm going to put 3 holes per length of Mackie sleeper. So I'm going to come around about 100 millimeters from the edge of our rebate, and let's just mark that up there. And we want to come down to the center of our sleeper. You know what, it doesn't really matter where you put it, as long as you've got 3 relatively evenly spaced. Okay, we're just about ready to drill our hole. Now, what I've done is measured 50 millimeters up my 10 mil drill bit, and I've put some tape around there. That's going to act as a guide, so when I drill through the sleeper, I know when I come up to that mark not to go any further. We certainly don't want to go all the way through our sleeper. It's going to look horrible from the other side. Cool, we're now ready to throw in our Rio bars. Our reinforcing rods are 400 millimeters long. They fit into a 250 millimeter deep hole plus 50 millimeters of scoria on top. 50 millimeters goes into the sleeper, and there's a 50 millimeter kick at the end. Rightio, now there's a couple of different ways we can cut it and bend it. Good old fashioned way, you could use an angle grinder, or nice and simple, a hacksaw like this. And then to get the bend, you could put it in a vise and just knock it over 90 degrees. But an even simpler way is by using our good old tool here, the cutter bender. So all I'm going to do is mark out our Rio rod, and I want about 50, 60 mil bend on it. First thing I'm going to do is put our bend on. Open that right up. Okay, now that's given me my 90 degree, lovely there. Okay, so let's just cut it to length. That just sits in there nicely like that. Now let's just flip that over. We've got our Rio rods that we've cut. Now all we're going to do is hammer them into our hole. Lovely, that's nice and tight. Rightio, all our rods are in. Next thing we're going to do is mark out where our holes are going to be to take our concrete that our rods are going to slip into. For that, I've just cut up a couple of these little pegs. You can use whatever you want. And on the outside on our lawn, I'm just going to mark the center of our hole. This is for later on, so let's just whack these in. Rightio, it's time to prep for our scoria. To do that, I'm just going to scrape out a little channel about 50 mil deep, just the spade's width. Rightio, she's all scraped out. Next thing I need to do is dig my holes for our concrete. So once again, I'm just going about the spade width, and I'm going to go down about 250 millimeters deep. First, I'm concreting in my 2 straight sleepers, and then I'm going to move on to the other sections. Okay, so let's just top these holes up with concrete. Now I'm laying my scoria for the sleeper to sit on. It also helps with drainage. Okay, all my concrete and scoria is ready to go for me to put in my sleepers. Okay, all we need to do is roll this over, just ensuring that we're keeping a nice straight line with our string line. Righto, so that's looking actually pretty good as it is. It's sitting nice and straight with my string line, and I'm level with the top of the string line. I'm just going to use a couple of packers just to bring it up a little bit. And that's just going to ensure that the weight of the sleeper isn't going to push the whole thing down. Lovely. Rightio, this is looking really good. Now all you have to do is repeat the process for the rest of it. Now I just go along and tighten all the coach screws. Okay, I've let my concrete set overnight. Everything's looking really good. There's a couple of things I need to do before we finish. I'm just going to knock the sharp edge off, use a Matrosity hand plane, and then I'm just going to give the whole lot a light sand. Right, that's looking really sharp. Now I could give that a stain, but I quite like that natural look. So there we have it, Macrocarpa garden borders, easy as. There are heaps of different styles of precast concrete edging you can use to make a nice clean edge between your lawn and your garden. We're using this flat style here. I'm going to show you how to install a concrete mowing strip, which is going to give us a nice defined edge to our garden. Okay, to do that, I'm just going to lay my concrete edge down there. That's about the line I want it. So let's say I'm measuring 600mm parallel off our back fence. Okay, so what I'm going to use is just an offcut of some reinforcing rod. You could use a peg of anything if you like. Let's just tap that in one end. We're going to do the same down the other. Now my section is slightly sloping from here going down that way, and it's a little bit wibbly wobbly in between. So what I want to do is put a string line on from point A to B, and I'm going to measure 100mm off the ground. Okay, so let's just adjust that string line so we're 100mm, and we'll come back to our other end. Okay, now this 100mm, I'm going to use this as my point of reference or my datum throughout the whole job. Now my concrete edging is 50mm thick. I'm also going to have 50mm of concrete underneath that. Now that's going to be bedded in 10mm into that concrete, and I'm also going to have 20mm of base course underneath. So all up, I need to dig a trench that's 110mm deep. Now, these little 100mm trenching shovels are absolutely perfect for this sort of situation. Let's just check out our hole. We need 110mm deep for our trench, and we've got 100mm sticking off to our datum, so that's 210mm all up we're looking for. Now that's looking pretty good, so I'll just go along and finish that off. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is put in our 20mm of base course. To do that, I'm just using some scoria, and we'll just tip that in. And let's just give it a stomp down so it's nice and solid using a sledgehammer. I'm going to finish that off, and then we're ready for concrete. We're after 140mm from our line to the top of our concrete. So we're not looking too bad there now. Now I've just made up a little wooden float out of an old bit of 4x2. So I'm just going to use that just to smooth this out a little bit. Okay, so I'm just going to smooth off the rest of this concrete, and then we're ready to install our concrete edging. So you actually want to work relatively quickly here. You know, on a day like this, it's quite overcast, and the concrete's not going to go off too quick, but still, you've got to be relatively quick. So I'm just bedding that in the concrete about 10mm down. Let's just double check off our line. We're after 100mm, so that's looking pretty good. So the whole time I'm just keeping an eye exactly on that string line just to keep my pavers in line there, and just measuring the front and back of every paver just to ensure that we're right on track. So the idea is not to put too much concrete in your trench. We don't want the concrete coming all the way up to the top of the paver because we want to push the grass up to the edge of it. So give us a nice crisp line. That could come up a tad. All right, so we'll just come up to our last paver. Now, I'm going to cut this paver to length because I want this paver to finish in line with our Mackie sleepers here. So I'm just going to run a line down off our sleepers and put a pencil mark on our paver. So now I'm going to take that way and cut it. I'm using an angle grinder with a diamond blade on it, but you can also use a masonry blade. Let's just double check that we're sitting on a hundy and make sure nice and straight on our line. That's looking good. Okay, so we just got our last piece to cut. I'm going to measure that up and cut it the same as this one, 375. Cool, everything's looking fantastic. I'm just going to do one more check just to make sure nothing's been knocked. We want these all nice and straight and also exactly 100 mil off our line. So now, this is only a small stretch. This is only about 3 or 4 meters long. So if you're doing any longer than this and it's a really, really hot day, I'd suggest maybe only doing maybe about 4 or 5 pavers at a time, especially if it is a hot day. You don't want that concrete going off. Once the concrete sets, we'll be ready for our next step. Okay, I've just mixed up some mortar and I'm just wedging it in there quite nicely with this little pointing trowel. The idea when mixing this up, you want it relatively runny to get it in between and just squeeze that off, take off the excess. So I've let this dry for about 10 minutes and we're just taking off the excess. Don't want to take off too much of the mortar in there, and that's the desired effect I'm after. Now just give all the edging a good old clean up as you go, because this mortar can stain them and then it'll stay on there forever. So you want to pick it up while it's relatively wet. Right, all done. Now we have a great looking, low maintenance concrete border. And there we have it. That's 2 easy ways to create garden borders and make your garden look a whole lot tidier.